Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sprint APAC 2.1. My name is Rob Whiteley. I'm the General Manager of the NGINX business unit here at F5, and I'm excited to spend the next 25 minutes or so talking to you about a series of exciting things we're doing in NGINX open source, NGINX commercial, and a set of recommendations on how you can get the most out of those investments, in essence, architecting your future in the digital era. So let's go ahead and get into it. First and foremost, I need to start with acknowledging that the pandemic has had a profound impact on how we build and operate our applications. And you're probably thinking, yes, I know, that's not news, Rob. And I get it, it's not. But there's one thing that we've learned about the pandemic is that it's forcing companies who previously had a different business model to completely alter that business model. Maybe you're in food delivery, maybe you do operate retail locations. Maybe you already have an online presence, but suddenly it has blossomed and you need to support a much higher volume. All of these are things that are requiring change so that you can not only survive, but thrive in the digital era. So what have we learned given all this? Well, first and foremost, developers are the key. For you to survive online and with digital services, you need to empower your developers to be agile. They need to be able to make changes, launch new services, get those services up, running, and developed as quickly as possible. And what we see is the companies that are best at making their developers agile are the ones that grow the most and compete the best. And so we know that empowering developers is critical, but there's a downside. Sometimes when you empower your developers, it creates tool sprawl. Why? Because developers love picking every tool for every job, and it may be a different tool for every job. And that sprawl leads to complexity. I'm now having to operate a vast estate of tools that are often doing the same function, and complex things fail. Therefore, I introduce risk into my environment. And so now I have to have a consequence of developer agility, which is risk. And what we find is that your goal over the coming months is to balance that equation. How do I empower developers, but put guardrails in place so that there's operational consistency? Because that's what lowers my risk, reduces my complexity, and eliminates that sprawl. So let's get into a little bit about how you can do that with NGINX. See, our mission here at NGINX is to create technology that developers love, specifically open source, and I'll talk about this in a minute. But at the same time, we want to acknowledge that once a developer releases an application into production, there's going to be another team that then needs to operate that. This is the whole DevOps equation in motion. Nothing new there. But that DevOps team has a radically different set of needs and often has to introduce a whole new set of tooling just to operate the application. Well, what if the same technology my developers loved had a second set of capabilities that operators needed? And that way, I'm not introducing new tools, I'm not making things more complex, and I'm not introducing risk. That's how you balance the equation, and specifically how you do it with NGINX. What I'll do now is give you some good examples as we go through the content. So that brings me to how our mission has a twofold mission. I'm going to spend a few minutes on the first, which is how do we build open source tools that developers love? First of all, I'm pretty confident saying developers do love NGINX. We run about a third of the known internet, 450 million sites. And in fact, if you narrow down to just the busiest sites, that climbs to 2/3 of the internet running on NGINX. And why is it? Because developers know NGINX is fast. It is elegant code that is meant to process traffic as quickly as possible. It's flexible. You can use it for more than one thing: web serving, reverse proxy, load balancing, API gateway. That gives developers flexibility to have one code base that gets used for multiple things. It's lightweight. It's only about 2 megs. We fit in a container. It's highly orchestratable and very easy to spin up and spin down. And finally, it's easy. We have a simple, straightforward configuration language with a lot of community support that makes it easy to get up and running with NGINX and create a compelling digital experience. So that's great. That's what has got half our mission. I'll get to the other half in just a second. But first, I want to talk about what have we done from an open source perspective here in APAC. So things I would like to do is give you some proof points about traction we're seeing with our open source here in the APAC region, because we're getting among some of the best engagement worldwide throughout the countries that are tuned in today. And so I look at it as our goal is how do we help gather, how do we help meet, and how do we help recognize our community? So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, we need to deploy local resources so that our community can come to authoritative NGINX sites to learn more about the software and its best practices. Towards the end of this presentation, I'll give you some specific links, but that is something that we've spent a lot of time, specifically in Japan and China, making sure that we are able to provide that definitive gathering place. Well, what about meeting? Because you know what? Not everyone comes to us. We need to be out in the community and we need to go where our users are. And that's why we're investing heavily in our meetup infrastructure. So on meetup.com, you can now subscribe in 8 different cities to both physical and virtual meetups. We're doing that in cities throughout Australia and Singapore and Hong Kong, all in English. We're doing it in Thailand, we're doing it in Japan, and we're doing it in China. Each one of those is localized for the language in that region and gives you a great opportunity to meet your peers and exchange best practices. And then the last part is we've done specific things to recognize what we think of as the super users in our community. So in the ASEAN area, we opened up the super user program, and it's a capability to acknowledge our most elite users, certify their skill set, and give them an ability to self-identify within the community. And that is something that we're looking to roll out even wider beyond just the ASEAN market. So great traction and momentum with open source in APAC. But there's also exciting investments we're making. At the end of the day, it's all about innovation and opening up new software. So here today, I'd like to announce 3 new projects that we're going to commit to releasing in the next 6 months. These are projects that have not been talked about anywhere, and this is the first time we're announcing them. The first is we want to introduce an NGINX upgradability tool. So what does that mean? Well, many of you operate a large NGINX estate, hundreds or even thousands of instances. They're probably running all different versions. Each version may or may not be upgradable to the latest. So what we want to do is make it easier. We're creating a new open source tool that allows you to identify different versions of NGINX and figure out what version they can be upgraded to. That way you get access to the latest features, fix bugs, and patch critical vulnerabilities. And so this tool will make it easy for you to stay on the latest stable version of NGINX. We're also investing in new open source packages. There's something called the NGINX Essentials package, which today is limited to the China market. But one of the things that we want to do is soon release a capability to get support specific to our open source. That way, if you don't need the commercial version, NGINX Plus, you can still rely on NGINX's world-beating support. And then finally, we also want to invest where the action is at, and that's in the Kubernetes space. We've been active in some of the Kubernetes special interest groups, the SIG groups, but we're especially interested in working with the Gateway API group. This is a specific next generation ingress project that's looking to change the way Kubernetes is operating. And so we're committing to having a working referenceable Gateway API out and available in the very near future. So stay tuned for specifics and how to get all of this on GitHub, but 3 exciting commitments. And by the way, just the beginning. We intend to increase the velocity of open source that's coming from NGINX. Great, so that's half the equation, making sure developers have amazing open source tech. The other half of the DevOps equation is making sure that platform teams have the tools they need to operate an application at scale. And increasingly, we're targeting what we call the platform ops team. Now, this is a term you may not be familiar with, but it really refers to a team whose job it is to build developer-friendly infrastructure. So build Kubernetes, create a container and composable infrastructure so that as a developer puts code out there, it can automatically scale and inherit all the benefits. But there's a unique set of needs that these platform teams have. They need to scale. They have need to make sure that those containers can be replicated, scaled, more throughput, more traffic, more resiliency, so that as it starts serving users, it doesn't fall over. At the same time, there's governance. Who has access to this environment? Do my developers, can they do it in a self-service? And if so, do I have the right role-based access controls in place? So there's a separate set of capabilities just around governance. Then there's security. Now, I'm not saying developers don't care about security, but we definitely need to layer on specific things like a web app firewall or DDoS protection or anti-bot protection to make sure that the app is not vulnerable to different attacks, both internal and external. And then finally, there's need for observability, end-to-end tracing across the behavior of this application in a highly dynamic environment, such that I can more easily troubleshoot and mitigate and resolve any kind of downtime type errors. So these are tools that cause platforms to invest in new solutions. And what we find is that now our developers are selecting open source and our platform teams are selecting commercial. Well, what if we could bridge that gap? What if the same tools that our developers love to build a production application then has a set of features that could be turned on and paid for and subscribed to automatically solve platform teams? And that's the mission here at NGINX. That's how we solve this equation and allow you to architect for the future. So what are some examples and what are some products we're investing in to help your platform teams achieve these 4 outcomes? Well, the first is we've taken our instance manager tool, which we released about 6 months ago, and it's a way to configure, monitor, and track large estates of NGINX, whether it's open source or commercial. And our NGINX Instance Manager is coming out with 2.0. So it's going to have increased governance and observability and scale features, just what we talked about in the previous, so that platform teams can be even more confident operating NGINX at scale in your environment. We also have NGINX Plus R26 slated for February. This is going to have, along the same set, tools around security, around scalability that allow you to take NGINX Plus and make it even more suitable for microservices environments. So stay tuned for even more details specific to NGINX Plus that we'll be coming out with in the new calendar year. And then finally, one of our most predominant use cases is deploying NGINX as an ingress controller for Kubernetes. In fact, we have about 60+% market share in NGINX for Kubernetes. And so one of the things we want to do is release 1.14, which is the next version of a commercially supported ingress controller that has specific NGINX Plus based features that we can bring to Kubernetes. It's how we bring those attributes we just talked about to solve challenges that Kubernetes has out of the box, so to speak. So exciting announcements we haven't talked about that you'll see coming in the next few months and into the new calendar year. So stay tuned for awesome new products. Okay, so at this point, we've talked about some great open source traction and projects that are coming, some great NGINX commercial products that are coming. Let's now talk a little bit about how you can specifically use all this to architect for the future. And there's 3 basic capabilities here. And in fact, these capabilities build on each other. So I want you to remember these. First, you got to optimize Kubernetes traffic. Second, you got to manage and secure your microservices. And then third, you got to load balance across different Kubernetes clusters. So let's take a look at what this looks like in your environment. Well, unfortunately, Kubernetes out of the box has some challenges for platform teams. It doesn't have the most robust networking and security. And so there's things we've done in NGINX with our ingress controller, with our service mesh, with our WAF, to make sure that we make your Kubernetes production ready. Make it so that operators can confidently scale it. Think of it as building the foundation to your house. Well, once you have that solid foundation, you're going to start putting containers on that foundation, containers that your developers are using in their test and dev environment. And as they give you those containers, you're going to start noticing those containers communicate to each other via API calls. So you're going to have a whole new set of microservices API traffic that you need to secure and manage. And that's the second way we can help you architect for the future. We enable a set of API gateway, API lifecycle management, and API security tools so that you can automatically manage that API traffic. And it builds upon all the things you did in the foundation to make sure you're optimizing your Kubernetes traffic. So now you not only have a stable foundation, but you have rock solid API infrastructure to provide the most compelling microservices-based experiences. Well, once you've built that cluster and you've built the foundation, you've secured and managed the APIs, the next thing you need to do is connect that cluster to another cluster, or maybe to another application running in a traditional environment. And there's going to be a set of cloud native load balancing options that you're going to have to do. So we've done the hard work to build the software load balancing, the additional things like DDoS protection and bot mitigation, so that you're protecting how that traffic then routes, most likely through something like a big IP, to get global server load balancing and DNS. That way you get automatic failover and resiliency of that cluster. So now you have a stable foundation, you have rock solid APIs, and you have the ability to fail over. That's your roadmap. That's the path to success in this modern era. And it can all be done with NGINX open source, complemented with the commercial capabilities that platform teams need to operate Kubernetes at production scale. So take a moment and look at these three. Now, you may be saying, I've already done one of these, then traverse the roadmap in reverse. Maybe you've already solved API, but you don't have the most rock solid ingress controller. So you can go back and forth between these different layers. Okay, at this point, we've talked about the new introductions. We've talked about a little bit your roadmap. I want to end with some tactical things you can do to get started today. First, if you want to try NGINX open source, of course, you can go to nginx.org. But as I mentioned before, we're beginning to localize. So nginx.org.cn is now the only NGINX official open source site outside of our global. It's specific to the China market, and we've built a place to allow communities to come gather, get best practice, have forums, communicate, contribute code, and we want to do more regions. You tell us, if you're trying NGINX, where else would you like to see official NGINX open source websites? Well, once you try NGINX, you're going to want to learn how to use it, review different best practices. So as I mentioned, we're beginning to localize. We're taking all the great experience we have with docs.nginx.com, our global site, and we're localizing it for Japan with nginx.co.jp and for China with nginx-cn.net. So again, what more sites? What would be valuable for us so that we can localize content to help with your learning journey? And then finally, based on Sprint back in September, the global Sprint event, we introduced something called the Modern Apps Reference Architecture. It's an exciting community and ecosystem-wide effort to curate a whole set of tools, whether it's our technology like an ingress controller and a service mesh and a WAF, as well as communities that do logging, telemetry, dashboarding, tracing, and give you a curated set of tools that you can pull down and with just a few clicks, have an entire microservices reference architecture up and running quickly. It then gives you the ability to customize that. My ask, contribute that code back. Join with things like nginx.com/Mara, which is Modern Apps Reference Architecture, or go straight to GitHub/NGINX Inc., where you can find it. Issue pull requests, modify it for your region, your country, your industry, contribute back. Because if we can make Kubernetes faster, more reliable, then we all get greater compelling digital experiences and better developer experiences globally. I hope you found this helpful. Again, I'm so excited to be kicking off Sprint APAC 2.1. I'm so thankful you decided to join us today. And I think you'll find the rest of the conference is going to be chock full of exciting examples, stories, and technical content. So buckle in and get ready to take off for Sprint APAC 2.1.